When I first married Sarah, everything seemed like it had fallen into place perfectly. We were the couple that everyone admired, the ones who always had each other's backs, laughed at the same jokes, and built a life full of shared memories. It was the kind of love that people dream of, steady, calm, and full of potential. I truly believed I had found my soulmate, someone who understood me more than anyone ever could. She was my best friend, my confidant, and my love. At least that's what I thought. In the beginning, it was easy to feel like we had it all. We had our routine, our goals, and our dreams for the future. It was the kind of partnership where we worked together to create something bigger than ourselves. But if I'm honest with myself now, there are always little signs, tiny clues that something wasn't as perfect as I imagined. At first, I dismissed them. We all have our moments of doubt, right? I mean, no marriage is without its bumps, especially when life gets busy and routines settle in. But even the smallest things can eventually add up to something bigger. It started with the small stuff, the things that shouldn't have mattered but somehow made my gut tighten with unease. Sarah would occasionally forget little things I told her, or she'd seem distracted when we were talking. She was always so focused on work, always staying late, or going out with her friends from the office, leaving me to handle things at home on my own. There were times when I'd wonder if she was actually seeing someone else, but I'd immediately push those thoughts out of my mind. I trusted her. I loved her. And that was enough, right? But then it wasn't just the occasional slip-up that made me suspicious. It was the growing distance. Slowly, she began spending less time at home. There were more late nights, more unexplained absences, and the stories never seemed to quite add up. At first, I thought it was just a phase. She had her work, her social life, and I had mine. We were still partners, right? But something was changing, and I couldn't ignore it forever. The subtle glances, the way she'd quickly hide her phone when I came into the room, and the excuses started to feel too convenient. I wanted to believe that everything was fine, but the little things kept nagging at me. I kept convincing myself it was just my overactive imagination. Maybe it was just the stress of everyday life. Maybe she was just tired or preoccupied with work. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on. That sinking feeling in my stomach kept growing. I remember being in the kitchen one evening, preparing dinner after a long day of work, and suddenly realizing I hadn't heard from Sarah all day. We had a tradition of texting each other throughout the day, but today there had been nothing. I texted her a quick message, "Hey, how's your day going?" The reply came hours later, too late to be casual, and it didn't sit right with me. It was short, almost robotic, busy. "I'll talk later." Nothing else. "No, I miss you," or "can't wait to see you." It wasn't like her at all. I remember looking at the screen, staring at the message, and wondering if I was just overthinking it. But deep down, I couldn't deny that something felt off. It felt like she was pulling away from me, like I was no longer the person she wanted to talk to. It wasn't just the lack of communication, though. There were also the subtle shifts in how she treated me. We'd be sitting together on the couch, watching a movie, and she'd check her phone more than usual. If I commented on it, she'd brush it off, say it was work, but something about her responses felt rehearsed. I began to feel like I wasn't her priority anymore. I tried to brush it off as just stress or maybe her just needing her own space, but there was a pit in my stomach that wouldn't go away. The first real crack came when she started canceling plans we'd made. We'd plan a weekend getaway, something simple like a day trip to the beach, but she'd always have an excuse: work, a friend needing help, or sometimes she'd just say she was too tired. But I knew that something wasn't adding up. I began to feel like I was the last person she wanted to spend time with. One evening, I found myself standing in our bedroom, looking at the closet, thinking about how her side of the bed always seemed colder these days. I couldn't help but wonder, had she stopped caring about us? About me, it felt like the more I tried to get closer, the more she pulled away. Then came the moment I couldn't ignore anymore. It was a random afternoon, just like any other. I was on my way home from work early, thinking I'd surprise Sarah with a homemade dinner. Maybe we could finally have one of those quiet evenings we used to love so much. But when I walked in, it wasn't the surprise I expected. I opened the door to find her sitting on the couch, but not alone. There was another man with her, someone I didn't recognize. They were laughing, talking too casually, their body language too familiar. Something in the way they were sitting, how close they were, how relaxed it all seemed, made my heart skip a beat. The instant they saw me, the room grew tense. I didn't even need to ask what was going on, I knew. My heart raced, my palms became sweaty, and everything in that moment started to feel surreal. The shock, the disbelief, all of it hit me at once. But it wasn't just the betrayal I felt, it was the realization that I had been blind to it all. Sarah jumped up immediately, a nervous energy in her movements. She tried to explain, but her words were scattered, defensive, and filled with guilt. She claimed that the man was just a coworker, that I was overreacting, but I could see it in her eyes, the panic, the fear that I'd seen too much. She was trying to hide something, and the more she spoke, the more convinced I became that this was no accident. I didn't want to believe it, but as I stood there, looking between her and the man, I realized that the life I thought I had was just an illusion. I had been living in a dream while someone else had been orchestrating my downfall. I couldn't process everything all at once, so I just stood there, feeling numb, asking myself how I didn't see it before. The lies, the distance, the secrets, it was all adding up now, and I felt like the rug had been pulled out from under me. But I was still in shock. I wanted answers. I wanted to scream. But I stayed silent, waiting for her to tell me the truth. She didn't. Instead, she made excuses, trying to deflect my suspicions, but in my heart I knew that I had been betrayed. What's worse, I knew now that this wasn't the first time, nor would it be the last. And that was when the real betrayal began. The first real shock came when I received that anonymous message. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter as I was making coffee one morning, the soft sound cutting through the silence of the early hours. When I glanced at the screen, I saw a photo of Sarah smiling, standing too close to someone I didn't recognize. I froze. My heart stopped for a beat as I stared at the image. It wasn't just the photo itself that bothered me, it was the context. I had never seen this man before, but there was an intimacy in the way they stood together, a closeness that didn't sit right with me. They were leaning into each other, almost as if they were a couple, and yet there was no explanation. The caption beneath the photo didn't help either. It simply read, "Guess she's not so faithful after all." At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake, maybe a weird joke or someone trying to stir trouble. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it wasn't real. I was just being paranoid. I had to be right. Sarah had always been so open with me, so trustworthy, or so I thought. This couldn't be happening. But that damn photo wouldn't leave my mind. The more I looked at it, the more it felt real, the more it gnawed at me. I was shaking now, holding the phone in my hand, the screen displaying that image over and over. It felt like everything was turning upside down. I kept asking myself, what if it's true? What if this is what's been going on? When I wasn't looking, it didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. I needed to confront Sarah, to ask her about this, but I didn't even know where to start. I was terrified of the answer. I waited until that evening to bring it up. She came home late as usual, tired and distracted, just like so many other nights. She kissed me on the cheek when she walked in, and I immediately noticed how perfunctory the gesture felt. It wasn't the warmth I was used to. It felt almost automatic, like she was just going through the motions. I didn't want to say anything at first. I thought maybe I'd been overthinking it, that maybe I was just imagining things. But the nagging feeling in my chest wouldn't go away. As we sat down for dinner, I finally asked her, carefully at first, "Who's the guy in the picture you were with?" She looked at me with confusion, then annoyance, almost as if I had asked an absurd question. "What picture?" she replied. But I could see it in her eyes. There was a flicker of panic. It was so quick, but I noticed it. The way she hesitated. She wasn't as calm as she wanted me to believe. I pulled out my phone and showed her the picture. Her face turned pale as she stared at it, her eyes widening slightly. For a moment, she didn't say anything. I was watching her closely, searching for any hint of guilt, but she quickly regained composure. She shook her head, dismissing it with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "That's just a colleague," she said. "We were at a work event. It's nothing, I promise." I wasn't convinced. I could tell she was lying, but I didn't know how to press her further. Something about the way she dismissed it so easily didn't sit right with me. My gut told me there was more to this than she was letting on. She seemed too eager to brush it off, as if she had already prepared a story. I felt my chest tighten as the conversation continued. She started getting defensive, almost accusing me of being paranoid. She told me I was overreacting, that I needed to trust her, but it was hard to hear her when all I could think about was that photo, the closeness, the secrecy. I wasn't imagining it. She had been hiding something from me, something that I wasn't ready to face. That night, as I lay in bed next to her, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over in my head. Was I just paranoid, or had she really been unfaithful? Could I have missed something that obvious? I wanted to trust her, but every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was her with him. That image of them together kept flashing in my mind, and the more I thought about it, the more I started to feel sick. My heart ached, but I didn't know what to do about it. I had no concrete evidence, just that one photo, and a gut feeling that something was terribly wrong. The next few days were a blur. Every interaction with Sarah felt like I was walking on eggshells. I tried to act normal, to pretend like everything was fine, but I couldn't. The distance between us was growing wider with each passing moment, and the more I tried to close that gap, the more she seemed to pull away. She was still there physically, but emotionally she was becoming a stranger. I began to notice more things, small things, but things that added up. She would come home late again, but this time she'd be distracted, almost as if she had something to hide. When I asked her about her day, she'd give vague answers or change the subject. Her phone was always glued to her hand, and if I happened to glance at it, she would quickly lock the screen. It was subtle, but it was there. The signs were becoming clearer. It felt like I was losing her to someone else, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I hated feeling like this. I hated that I was becoming the kind of person who didn't trust their spouse. But how could I ignore everything? How could I pretend like nothing was happening when I felt like I was being lied to? There were so many little moments, her strange behavior, her evasiveness, the way she avoided my questions, that made me question everything. That was when I began to consider the possibility that I wasn't just paranoid. Maybe there was something more to it. Maybe Sarah wasn't the woman I thought she was. Maybe she was hiding something much darker, something that had been brewing beneath the surface for longer than I realized. The worst part of it all was the feeling of powerlessness. I couldn't prove anything. I didn't have solid evidence. It was just a feeling, a suspicion that I couldn't shake. But I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something had to give. I had to find out the truth, even if it meant facing the reality of a betrayal that I wasn't ready to accept. I wasn't sure how I would confront Sarah, or if I even could. But one thing was certain: I had to know what was really going on. I spent the next few days in a haze of uncertainty, trying to piece together everything I had seen and felt. Each time I looked at Sarah, my mind would replay the photo, the distant look in her eyes, the way she'd lied so easily when I confronted her. It was as if I was standing at the edge of a cliff, too scared to step forward but unable to look away from the darkness below. I needed to find the truth, but I didn't know where to begin. I didn't want to admit it to myself, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I was no longer sure of the woman I had married. It was the third night after the photo, a Thursday, when something inside me snapped. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. The doubt, the lies, the distance, it was all too much to carry. Sarah had come home late again, like always. She had a work event that night, but the way she spoke about it seemed off. Her words were forced, rehearsed, and for the first time I saw a flicker of unease in her eyes. When she kissed me on the cheek before retreating to her study, I could feel the coldness in her touch. It was like we were strangers. I couldn't stay in that house with the weight of unanswered questions crushing me. I needed to find out the truth, and I needed to do it now. So I decided to follow her. It wasn't a decision I made lightly, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't live with this gnawing feeling in my chest anymore. I needed to know. It wasn't hard to figure out where she was going. I knew she'd mentioned something about a meeting after work, and I had overheard her talking about meeting some colleagues for drinks earlier in the week. I grabbed my jacket and stepped out quietly, hoping she wouldn't notice that I was following her. I didn't know what I was expecting to find, but deep down I was already bracing myself for something I wasn't ready to face. The night was cold, and the streets were empty, the silence of the city almost suffocating as I kept my distance. I followed her car down the familiar streets, my heart pounding in my chest. Every time she stopped at a red light, I would pull back slightly, trying to stay hidden, trying to stay invisible. I couldn't believe I was doing this. It felt like a betrayal in itself, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the only way to uncover the truth. Eventually, she turned into a parking lot outside a small bar. My breath caught in my throat as I parked a few spaces down, my hands trembling. I watched her get out of the car and walk into the bar with a confident stride, almost as if she was expecting me to be watching. For a moment, I just sat there staring at the entrance. I felt a mix of anger and hurt bubble up inside me, but I pushed it down. I couldn't let myself lose control. Not yet. I waited for what felt like hours, watching people come and go, but Sarah didn't come out. It wasn't until much later that I saw him. He was tall, with dark hair, wearing a jacket that looked too expensive to be casual. He walked out of the bar, glancing around, then lit a cigarette. My pulse quickened as I recognized him immediately. It was the same man from the photo, the one I didn't know, the one who had been so close to Sarah. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't. But seeing him standing there outside that bar confirmed everything I had feared. I could feel my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. I wanted to confront him right then, to walk up to him and demand to know what was going on, but I knew I had to be careful. I needed to understand the full picture before I made any rash decisions. I stayed in the car watching, waiting. Minutes passed, then an hour. I was beginning to question if I had misjudged the situation when I saw Sarah finally exit the bar, walking right up to the man. He didn't greet her with the same casualness I had seen earlier. No, this time there was a deeper connection. He reached out for her hand, pulling her into a brief but intimate embrace. It was too much. My heart shattered as I watched them walk toward his car, laughing as if there was nothing wrong, as if this was all perfectly normal. That was when I knew. It wasn't just a work colleague or a misunderstanding. It wasn't just some innocent moment captured in a photo. This was something more. This was betrayal. I could feel the anger rising inside me, but there was something else too. A cold, hollow feeling that threatened to consume me. I had always prided myself on being able to trust people, on being the kind of person who believed in the good in others. But now that trust was gone, shattered into a million pieces, and I didn't know how to pick them up again. I stayed in the parking lot for a while longer, watching as they drove off together, disappearing into the night. The world felt different now, like everything I thought I knew had been turned upside down. I didn't know what to do with myself. I didn't know how to process what I had just seen. Eventually, I made my way back home, feeling like a stranger in my own life. The silence in the house was deafening when I walked in, the emptiness more suffocating than I could have imagined. I stood there for a while, just staring at the walls, trying to make sense of everything. But I couldn't. Nothing made sense anymore. The next day, I decided to confront Sarah. I had to. I couldn't keep living in the shadow of this uncertainty. But as I prepared to ask her what had really been going on, a thought crossed my mind. What if this was all part of something bigger? What if she wasn't just cheating on me for a fleeting affair? But what if there was more to it? What if she had been lying to me for much longer than I realized? The doubt that had been creeping in now consumed me entirely. There was more to this than just one man, one betrayal. There was a plan behind all of it, a web of lies I had never seen. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I wasn't just dealing with infidelity. I was caught in the middle of something much darker, something that was designed to destroy everything I had built. The following days felt like a storm had engulfed me, and the truth was a bitter pill that I couldn't seem to swallow. The betrayal I had uncovered wasn't just about Sarah and that man. It was the tip of the iceberg, a small part of a much larger, darker scheme. As much as I hated to admit it, I was no longer in control of my life. I had spent years building a relationship, a marriage on the foundation of trust, only to see it crumble under the weight of lies and deceit. I needed answers, but more than that, I needed to understand the full extent of the betrayal I was facing. What had Sarah been hiding? What was her relationship with this man? And why did it feel like there was something even more sinister at play? I spent the next few days in a constant state of unease, unable to think clearly, unable to find peace. Every corner of our home felt foreign, Every object seemed to mock me with the memories of a life that now seemed like a lie. I couldn't look at Sarah without the image of her with him flashing in my mind, without hearing the echo of her cold dismissal when I first confronted her. How could she be so comfortable lying to me? How could she look me in the eyes and pretend like nothing was wrong? It was late on a Saturday when I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I couldn't let this drag on, not with so many questions lingering in the air. I had to confront her again. But this time I knew I couldn't just ask her. I couldn't rely on her words or her explanations. The truth wasn't in her answers, it was in her actions, in the things she had been hiding from me for so long. I started by gathering the evidence, the things that had been building up in the back of my mind. The small inconsistencies in her stories, the way she always seemed to be distracted when I asked about her day, the time she spent away from home. I dug through her things, searching for anything that might give me a clearer picture of what had been happening behind my back. It felt wrong, like I was violating some sacred trust, but at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the only way to uncover the truth. I found what I was looking for. In the back of her drawer, tucked beneath a pile of old receipts and forgotten papers, I found a small, worn notebook. It was nothing special, just a simple black notebook with a few pages dog-eared and stained. But as soon as I opened it, I knew I had found something important. The first few pages were filled with notes, things Sarah had written down, but it wasn't until I flipped to the middle that I saw something that made my stomach drop. A name. The name was unfamiliar to me, and as I read through the notes, I began to see a pattern. There were references to meetings, to late-night phone calls, to trips she had taken when she said she was working. And then, towards the end of the notebook, there was a sentence that stopped me cold. The plan is in motion. Soon, everything will fall into place. I felt a chill run through me as I read those words. It was clear now this wasn't just about an affair. This was something much bigger. Sarah hadn't just been unfaithful, she had been orchestrating something that involved more than just her and this man. And I was the one being played. I felt a surge of anger rise within me, but it was quickly replaced by something darker, something more terrifying. I didn't know what this plan was, but I knew it wasn't good. It felt like I was standing in the middle of a web of deceit, with no idea how far it stretched or who else was involved. I had been living in a lie, and now I had to figure out just how deep that lie went. It was time to confront Sarah again, but this time I had a different approach. I wasn't going to ask her questions and hope for answers. I was going to take control of the situation. I needed her to see that I knew what was going on, that I wasn't as naive as she had thought. I needed her to feel the weight of the lies she had been telling me for so long. When she came home that evening, I didn't wait for her to settle in. I didn't wait for the usual pleasantries. I stood in the living room, holding the notebook in my hand, waiting for her to walk through the door. The moment she saw me, she knew something was wrong. The color drained from her face, and for a split second, she looked like a deer caught in headlights. "What is that?" she asked, her voice trembling. I didn't answer. Instead, I handed her the notebook, watching as her eyes flicked from the cover to the pages inside. I could see the panic in her face as she skimmed through the notes, her fingers trembling. "Sarah," I said, my voice low, steady. "What is this? What have you been planning?" She didn't answer at first. Her lips parted as if she were about to speak, but no words came out. It was like she was trying to figure out how to lie her way out of it, how to explain away the evidence that was right in front of her. But I wasn't going to let her. Not this time. I stepped closer to her, my voice rising slightly. "What is this plan? Who are you working with? What have you been doing behind my back?" Finally, she dropped the notebook to the floor, her shoulders slumping as she looked away from me. For a moment, I thought she was going to tell me everything, but instead she just shook her head, her eyes filled with guilt and fear. "You don't understand," she whispered. "You don't know what I've been doing. I never wanted you to find out." But I wasn't listening to her excuses anymore. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me with her guilt and her tears. I needed to know the truth, the whole truth, no matter how much it hurt. "I want answers, Sarah," I said, my voice hard. "No more lies. Tell me everything." She looked at me then, and for the first time in weeks I saw a glimpse of the woman I had once known. But it was fleeting, almost as if it were a ghost. She took a deep breath, and I could see her struggling with herself, trying to decide how much to reveal. I was planning to leave you, she admitted, her voice breaking, not just for him, but for something else. I was trying to protect you from what was coming, from what I had gotten myself involved in. I didn't want you to be part of it. I didn't understand. None of it made sense. What had she gotten herself involved in? Who was behind this? And why was I the one who was left in the dark? I was trying to protect you from them, she said, almost as if she were talking to herself. But now I don't know if I can keep you safe. And just like that, I realized that this wasn't just a betrayal of love. It was a betrayal of everything I thought I knew about my life. There was something far more dangerous going on, and I was standing in the middle of it, powerless to stop it. I stood there in complete silence, the weight of Sarah's words hanging in the air like a thick fog. I tried to process what she was saying, but it felt like my mind was scrambling to catch up. She had been trying to protect me from something so dangerous that she couldn't even tell me the full truth. And in trying to shield me, she had betrayed me in the worst way possible. The anger inside me flared up again, but there was no satisfaction in it. Just confusion. She hadn't been having an affair with just one man, had she? It wasn't just a love triangle, it was something far more complex, something deeper and darker. Protect me from what I asked, my voice cold, demanding. I needed to know what she had gotten herself involved in, and I needed to know now. The notebook, the strange notes, and the cryptic sentences, it was all part of something that I couldn't wrap my head around. Something that was happening right under my nose while I remained blissfully ignorant. Who's behind this? What do you mean by them? Her face paled, and she took a shaky breath before looking up at me. The fear in her eyes was palpable, and it hit me harder than anything she had said so far. She wasn't just worried about what I would think or feel. She was scared of something, or someone that I had no knowledge of. The realization made my stomach churn. I never wanted this life for you, she whispered, her voice cracking. But it's too late now. You're in it, whether you like it or not. She stepped back, as if distancing herself from the gravity of her own words, and I could sense the guilt radiating off her, almost suffocating the air around us. I was trying to get out, but now, I don't know if I can. I took a step toward her, my mind racing. Get out of what? What are you talking about, Sarah? Who are they? What's going on? But she wouldn't meet my eyes anymore. She kept looking down at her hands, as if ashamed of herself, like she didn't deserve to explain anything to me. She had already taken everything from me, the trust, the foundation of our marriage, and now she was leaving me to piece together the wreckage. I never meant for you to get involved in this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I should have told you everything sooner. I was afraid. Afraid of what would happen if you found out. I thought I could protect you by keeping you in the dark. At that moment, I knew the betrayal had gone beyond just infidelity. It wasn't about love, lust, or passion anymore. There was something else at play, something far more sinister. I needed to know what she was talking about, but the more she spoke, the more I realized that she wasn't going to give me the answers I needed. She had crossed a line, and no matter how much she tried to explain, it wouldn't change the fact that she had kept me in the dark for so long. I was working with them, she finally admitted, her voice trembling. They told me what to do, where to go, who to talk to. I never wanted to, but they made me, they used me, and I couldn't see a way out. The way she said it, it wasn't just a confession, it was a plea for understanding. But I couldn't understand. How had I been so blind? How could I have missed the signs? The lies, the secrecy, the strange behavior, it all made sense now, but it didn't make it easier to accept. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. What do you mean used you? What kind of people are we talking about here? The pieces were beginning to come together, but I wasn't sure I wanted to know the full picture. Every part of me screamed that I should walk away, that I should end this nightmare right now. But I couldn't. I couldn't leave without the truth, without knowing exactly what I was dealing with. They wanted me to break you, she said, and my heart skipped a beat. They knew how much you meant to me, and they thought if they made me destroy our relationship, you'd be vulnerable. They had a plan that involved us both. I don't know everything, but I was supposed to drive you away. That's why I started lying. That's why I kept pushing you away. They said if I could make you doubt me, doubt everything, you'd be easier to control. I could feel my world shattering around me. I had been part of a game I hadn't even known I was playing. The whole time I had thought I was married to a woman who loved me. I had trusted her, believed in her, and now I found out that I was just a pawn in a sick, twisted plot. My chest tightened with anger, but more than that, I felt a profound sense of loss. The woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with, was not who I thought she was. She had been complicit in this elaborate deception, and I had been too blind to see it. Who are they, Sarah? Who are these people? I demanded, my voice shaking now. What do they want from us? Why did you let them do this? She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. I didn't have a choice. They were dangerous, and I was too deep in it. I thought I could get away, that I could protect you by cutting ties, but I was wrong. They know everything about us. They've been watching us for months. They've been manipulating everything in our lives. And now it's too late. The fear in her voice was enough to send a chill down my spine. It wasn't just that she had been unfaithful. It wasn't just that she had lied to me. It was that she had been part of something so dangerous, something that had put both of us in harm's way. I wanted to scream, to yell at her for everything she had done, but I was frozen, trapped in the realization that there was no turning back. There was no undoing what had been done. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice cracking. I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt you. I was just trying to survive. Survive. That word echoed in my mind. It was the final nail in the coffin. Sarah hadn't just been cheating on me, she had been living a lie to protect herself, to protect her own survival in a world that I knew nothing about. The person I had married was gone, replaced by someone who was willing to do anything to stay alive in a twisted, dangerous game. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to move forward, or even if I could. I wanted answers, I wanted justice. But more than that, I wanted my life back. I wanted the woman I had loved, the woman who had been mine. But now I knew the truth. And the truth was, I was never going to get that back.